It's no exaggeration to say that without the contributions of Les Paul, we wouldn't have anything like the music that we have today. His contributions to recording technology, and electric guitar in particular, are unsurpassed in terms of influence on modern music. Along the way, Paul was also a versatile and talented entertainer, a virtuoso musician in several styles and genres that has influenced countless other musicians. It's also probably fair to say that there aren't many individuals who have been inducted both into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and the National Inventors Hall of Fame. Yet there is Les Paul in the Inventors Hall of Fame right between Louis Pasteur, one of the founders of microbiology, and Gerald Pearson, who invented the solar cell. Les Paul's significance in the history of music itself is incalculable. When you look through his exhaustive list of achievements and discoveries, it's pretty difficult to dispute the fact that Les Paul is the greatest musical pioneer of the 20th century. Keith Richards perhaps summed it up best when he said, "We must all own up that without Les Paul, generations of flash little punks like us would be in jail or cleaning toilets." End quote. Paul was born in Waukesha, Wisconsin in 1955 as Lester William into a family of German descent. He began working with electronics at a very early age, as well as playing music, and by the time he was 13, he was playing country music in local bands. Among his early innovations were a harmonica holder, which allowed him to accompany himself on a guitar, as well as a guitar amplifier that allowed him to be heard by the large crowds that had begun to gather at his shows. As his career progressed, Les Paul began a quest to redefine recording technology, resulting in his innovation of layering tracks over each other. Here's an example of what I mean, as demonstrated by me. Of his interest in recording technology, Paul stated, quote, "The recording began as soon as I got the guitar. From the very beginning, the two sides, music and sound reproduction, were always equal. My mother always said I was good, but I had no way of knowing how good I actually sounded because I was playing. So I decided the best way forward was to record it. Recordings were just coming in with the Edison idea of gouging it out of a piece of celluloid or acetate, but it all began for me when I realized that I should be hearing what my mother was hearing. I was fascinated with the idea of frequency response, distortion, clean sound versus not clean sound. The telephone, the radio, and the phonograph were right there in my backyard in terms of what I needed for electric guitar, amplifiers, or PA systems, but I really had no idea that I would have such an influence on music and on recording technology." End quote. Initially, Paul used discs to record a guitar, and then would record another playing along with the original, creating a layered effect in what was effectively the first example of multi-tracking. This was both a costly and destructive process, however, because the original discs could not be used for re-recording, and so would be discarded in the hundreds as the sessions continued. Following the end of World War II, a solution was found. An engineer by the name of Jack Mullen had returned to the United States with a tape recorder and some Farbin tape, which was almost unknown in the United States. Les Paul's friend Bing Crosby hired Mullen and set him up with the company Ampex to produce tape recorders based on the German model that Mullen had returned with. Crosby gifted the second such recorder to Paul, who promptly began tinkering with it. By adding another playback head to the existing two, Paul could layer tracks as he had been doing with the discs, only now the process was much less time-consuming and much less costly with tape. In 1957, Les Paul's innovation had led to the creation of the first 8-track recorder by Ampex Company in collaboration with Paul. Paul stated, "I was deeply involved with my dream, which was multi-track recording. Starting in 53 and finishing in 56, it took a lot of hard work. We flew the 8-track machine back to Ampex 3 times before we finally got it up and running." Paul continued, "A friend of mine had come back from the Signal Corps with all the parts, and he put them together and made the first tape machine in 1946. I must have had that tape machine for about an hour in my garage when I said to my wife, 'Don't even finish hanging up the laundry. just start up the car and head for Chicago, because that's where we're going to perform. I was already packing and ready to leave with the first ever tape machine that could do sound on sound. Within an hour, I'd already figured out how to do it, and that's how I came up with the idea of multi-tracking. I'd only drawn the idea out on the back of an envelope, so I hadn't made a prototype. My wife just kept saying to me over and over, "What if it doesn't work?" But I knew it would work, and the greatest records that I've made since have all been made that way. The idea was originally turned down by various companies. Ampex had started making the tape machines, so I called them and asked if this was a possible way of recording. They just said, "Come on up as fast as you can." We went up there immediately, weighed out exactly what we were going to do, and worked out how long it would take to do it. In the end, it took us 3 years. Ampex made the prototype and we returned it to them twice so they could make the changes we required. A lot of people were very skeptical and cautious, but gradually it became accepted. The bottom line was that we made the first multi-track machine, and we made it work. End quote. As a side effect of his interest in developing recording techniques, Wes Paul also discovered effects that are now commonplace on most modern music, such as delay, reverb, and phaser. Wes was noticing how rooms would have differing ambient qualities, and that the bathroom was a perfect place to achieve natural reverb for his recordings. In an interview with Performing Musician, he talked about discovering delay and phasing. Quote, "I gradually realized that you could go to a different place electronically. That's how I discovered all those things like reverb, delay, phasing, and flanging. But no one had put a name to these things. I just had to work out how to get those sounds for myself. The thing that impressed me the most was delay. I spent 2 years looking for that. Phasing was the other one. I was listening to Tokyo Rose during the war because they were playing our records. The station was coming out of Japan all the way to California, and it would fade in and out of phase. That sound was very intriguing to me. It gave me the idea for a guitar sound, so then I had to work out how to get that sound for myself." End quote. Here's an example of delay. Despite his massive contributions to recording technology and music in general, Wes Paul will always be remembered most for the guitar which bears his name. Like many of his contemporaries in the 1930s and 40s, Paul had become frustrated with the limitations of the guitar. Electric guitars at the time were essentially just acoustic guitars with severely limited pickups attached. At the volumes necessary for playing to larger audiences, feedback was literally and figuratively a constant headache, as was the lack of sustain in the notes being played. Paul began taking telephones and radios apart and attempting to build something that could amplify his sound. He first wedged a Victrola record player needle under the guitar strings and then tried a telephone handset, and subsequently a coil and magnet to make experimental pickups, plugging the output into a radio receiver for amplification. Paul's guitar could now be heard loud but not clear, as he hadn't quite figured out how to contain the feedback caused by the guitar's resonant hollow body. He tried stuffing everything from dirty socks to dishcloths into the body of the guitar, before abandoning the conventional body altogether. He experimented with attaching a guitar string to a piece of railroad track and found that to be a far more satisfactory platform for an electronically amplified instrument. The concept was developed further over the years, becoming a block of 4x4-inch pine wood fixed to the neck of an Epiphone guitar. After going through several prototypes, Paul finally developed a model that fulfilled his desires, an instrument that he referred to as the log. It was an apt description, as the guitar was basically a piece of 4x4 timber, a fence post according to legend, that Paul had attached the guitar neck and 2 pickups to. Although it didn't look like much, the log was just what Paul was after. The solid timber meant that the sustain he craved was now achievable and the problem of feedback was negated. For appearance's sake, Paul sawed out an old Gibson guitar and fitted it around the log. In a 1992 interview with Frank Doris, Wes Paul talks about why he went about creating the log. Quote, "Well, I wasn't happy with the acoustical sound of the instrument. I heard what was happening on the string itself without the influence of the guitar body, and I knew that when you plucked the string, that was the sound I wanted. And so analyzing it, I strung up the string on a railroad track, then on a piece of wood, then on the guitar itself, and I said, now look, the guitar alters it, it enhances it, it changes it, it distorts it. It makes it something different than it originally was. What I would like to do is go back and build the guitar starting with the string itself, picking up the sound of that string and then modifying it any way you wish. And so I came up with the idea of making a reproduction of the sound of the string only, and so I came up with a 4x4 with a string on it. Although Les Paul's accomplishments may not be as advanced from a technical standpoint as those of similarly regarded inventors, there is no doubt that his work has inspired and impacted countless lives, including my own. As a musician who plays both acoustic and electric guitar and bass, I am more than grateful for the innovations and work of Les Paul. Without his work and dedication, I undoubtedly would not be able to do much of what I love to do.